Hello, I'm Richard Vobes, the Bald Explorer. This is my story, a continuation of the heritage of my life, if you like. Now, you may recall I was telling you in recent weeks about my time as a walk-on or an extra in some of the UK's television programmes. And I had a great time doing that, and it was good fun. But at the same time as doing that, I was also trying to put together another theatre company. Now, you may remember I was telling you previously, before I'd been to mime school, how I'd put together a theatre company with three other chaps who, at the very last minute, had bailed out on a gig that we had up in Scotland. We called ourselves then the Toadstool Theatre Company, and we had a toadstool as the logo, as the letter T. And it looked really good. I was quite impressed with the drawing that we had, Toadstool Theatre Company. It looked fantastic. Well, this time I was setting up another theatre company, though it was a mime company, because I'd been to mime school and I'd come back. And I was still living at my mother's, who was in a bungalow as a warden to a bunch of vegetarian old people who were living in sheltered accommodation. They had their flats, but my mum was on call. So that was that was the situation. And I'd taken on this little office down in Littlehampton, and I was travelling down to Littlehampton by car each day because I had to get up because my mum had a lodger and I was sleeping on the floor. I'm just giving you a précis of what the previous stories were where I was. And I would go down and I took this little office in a dance studio called Dance Industry, which I gather from somebody that it's still in operation in Littlehampton, which is fantastic. And I had the office, and it was from there with a telephone line and an answering machine that I was then going off and doing my extra work and using the dance space when there were no classes going on to rehearse and put together a theatre production. Now, I mentioned my answering machine. I had this cassette answering machine. This is the day before we had voicemail and things like that. And I think it was a Panasonic actually. It was quite expensive as I remember at the time. Well, I must have left the door unlocked, as one did, trusted everybody, but anybody could walk in. And I think somebody did come in and they whipped the answering machine one time, and I'd come back and found it completely stolen. Not that you can be partly stolen. I mean, it was completely stolen. So I had to buy another one. But anyway, so I was doing the extra work at the same time. The main reason, though, for taking the office space was to put together this theatre company or this mime company with a bunch of talented other people to help me do this. And the floor space with the mirrors, the dance mirrors, was superb because one could practice in front of the mirror. And as my mime teacher, Desmond Jones, used to say, that mime is the art of looking good. You were aware of your body, you were aware of your the movement and how to make every movement, how you stood, everything look aesthetically pleasing. So the art of looking good wasn't talking about, dressing up in nice costumes or being handsome or having your hair in a certain way. It was more about how you held yourself, being open to the audience, performing in such as a way as to include the audience in a way so that they could read you very, very simply, as opposed to shuffling on and making it not quite as exciting as exciting or as vibrant as it could do. So having those mirrors there was a way for me to look at how I was performing. Now, I was working with two other guys, one chap called Nigel, who was the director and lighting technician, and we would collaborate really on the story, and he would give me his thoughts and we would work together. So I was sort of co-directing, but the main direction was down to him, and he did that very well, which was great. And when you're on stage and it's just you, you definitely need somebody there who can see it from the audience point of view. And although you're trying to put over your mime, your story, you do need that feedback. So he was great, and we would have great communication between the two of us as we put this together. The third chap, Keith, was a musician, and he played the keyboards and he composed. And he came on board and he composed some fantastic music for us, original music, and he played live when we did the performances, which was, again, absolutely fantastic. So we had this ensemble, if you like. I was the main performer. It was a one-man show, but up in the lighting box was Nigel doing the lights, and we all helped get the show in. And Keith was down there on stage, as it happened. I wanted him on stage, so I wanted people to see that the music was live. And also at one point, he became part of the performance. So we did two shows, in this one theatre show. We had two productions, I suppose is the best way of putting it. So we had our main feature, which was called Tiny Aeroplanes. And this was the story in Mime. There was some dialogue, as I remember it. There were no props, but there was a little bit of dialogue, as I seem to remember it, and recordings. We had recordings that would be played in to help the story. So it wasn't silent. There was the original music, there was recordings, and some dialogue. And it was the story of a man who had recently become either divorced or had broken up with his partner, and he had a passion for making model aeroplanes. Now, on the face of it, that might sound incredibly boring, but the great thing about Mime is you can take a subject and you can go into flights of fancy. It can be very I'm just trying to think of the word, ethereal in a way, so that although there was sequences in which we would see this chap in his workshop making these tiny aeroplanes out of balsa wood and various light timber and stuff in Mime, so I would be there chiseling it, and we'd have a sequence of that. And then he would go out up onto the downs or somewhere with his remote control, and he would be flying this aeroplane. He would then, his alter ego, you would suddenly be in the plane. So although he was here, I was thinking of people who must fly them, that they actually project themselves into the aeroplane. And so the next minute, we are in the aeroplane as a pilot, and we're flying, and Mime enables you to switch from being down here to being up there to being in the cockpit, and flying and having battles in the sky like a Battle of Britain scene. And you can suggest the flight of aeroplanes with your hands, back to the person flying it, back to you becoming the aeroplane, back into being the cockpit, and all of that. And it's an amazing sort of performance style, really, that can happen. So that was the first one. It's so difficult to talk about it because Mime is very much something you need to see. So that was about 40 minutes. We would have an interval, and then we had a second presentation which was called Animated Sentence. And this was very different. I was very much into what at the time it was not quite robotics, but it was an animated way of movement, of moving. And so I wanted to give the impression that you were watching a claymation, like something like Morph, the little character Morph that is a claymation, or indeed Wallace and Gromit, that you were watching plasticine being formed into a character and then the character coming to life. And so it was a bit of a study. And so I start off as a lump of clay, and then slowly I get moulded into this human being, and you realise this human being is actually a prisoner. And I can't remember now whether I was wearing a prison outfit. I don't think I was at that point. And I would be in jail, and I would be wanting to get out, and there would be issues and various things. I can't really remember too much about it now, but it was very much or semi-dance piece, if you like. I wouldn't call it dance by any means, but it was acting and movement. And I enjoyed that very much. And so we had these 2 productions. They took about 3 months to put them together. And in between all of that, I was still going off doing my bits on the bill or Campion or whatever programme it was. A lot of Poirots, I seem to remember. So that's what was funding everything. Me just doing the extra work, and then in between I would be working out and keeping fit and practicing the sequences to get them right. And then, of course, at the meantime, I think we had a little bit of rostra set, just something very basic. We didn't have any backdrops or anything like that. I think we had some lights, I can't remember now, and we had our music. And at the same time, one's promoting the thing left, right and centre to try and get it into art centres at the time. Well, I remember we had, I think our premiere performance was at Lodge Hill. Now, if you remember, Lodge Hill was one of those places that I used to go and teach mime. I was teaching mime before I'd gone to mime school, because I'd met and had been taught some very basic stuff by a Czechoslovakian mime artist called Yuri Stanislav. And George Rawlings, who was running these courses for the county at Lodge Hill, the drama courses, had asked me to do it. And they had a lecture theatre there at Lodge Hill. I don't know if that's still there. And as a premiere, George said, well, why don't you bring your mime show and show everybody? So we did. And so that was our premiere performance. And curiously, and we'll come back to this in a future video, that's actually where my future wife was to first see me, and a relationship blossomed from that, but we'll talk about that in a separate video. So we performed there, then we managed to get some other gigs, and I was working very hard on trying to get into theatres. The idea was that we would have a 70-30 box office split. So we would take 70% of the proceedings and the theatre would take 30%. So it was very much in all our interests to try and encourage as many people to come and watch the theatre show as is possible, and then we would all get something out of it. And we would just use the facilities that they had, the lights that they had, and we would plug our sound system, I think, into their sound system. I think actually we had our own sound system. I do seem to remember now that I bought speakers purposely for it. Anyway, so we had a few gigs, but not very many. But at one, very importantly, we invited Southern Arts. Now, they were an arts council. They were part of the Arts Council of Great Britain, which I don't know if that's still running now. We're talking late 80s at this point. We haven't quite got into the 90s, in the 1990s. I know that because my son was born in 1990 and I had yet to have children, and my relationship was only just beginning with my future wife, and we'll talk about that, as I say, later on. So it was in the 80s, and we invited Southern Arts, who were based in Winchester, to come along with the idea to see if they would give us some funding so that we could actually fund this theatre company properly and really try and get out, and also have the influence of being able to say we were Southern Arts funded, which was a very useful thing to have. Well, they did come and we put on a performance. I can't remember, it was a number of different places that we managed to get at, and we weren't making any money on these early performances. We were just keen to get it out, get some form of audience, and really to try and get the word out so that people would then say nice things about it. And the Southern Arts came along, and we got a letter back from them saying, thank you very much for inviting us, really enjoyed the show, loved it very much, thought it was very artistic, very original, blah, 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 all nice stuff. So but they also said, unfortunately, we don't think that we're going to be able to fund you. Our budget has been spent this year. You may make a submission for next year. So I got back in touch with them immediately and said, okay, that's no problem. Thank you very much for coming along. can we use some of that in your letter within our publicity to say Southern Arts endorse us, basically, and can you send us a logo? And they said no. They said no, unless we've actually given you the money and we're doing it officially, you cannot say anything that we support you in any shape or form, or any quote from the letter. And I thought that was stupid, because it was going to be holding the whole production back. Because if Southern Arts actually approved of us, even though they couldn't fund us, just to say Southern Arts thinks it's great, we recommend you have it, so that other theatre venues would go, yeah, actually they are potentially a bankable theatre company, we will have them, because that was the biggest issue, was getting theatres to say yes, they would have us at a 70-30 box office split, because we couldn't afford to hire the theatres lock, stock and barrel and then go in and try and get an audience, because we didn't know the areas. So we needed the theatre company, the theatres, to be on our side, and one way to prove that we were okay was to have the endorsement of Southern Arts, but they said no. So this was a real problem, and I couldn't believe it. It turned out, of course, that if at that time in the 80s, if you were black, disabled or had AIDS, that there was plenty of money going round. But if you were trying to do something for the mainstream media, for a mainstream audience, and you weren't tackling issues of black being disabled or AIDS, which was the big thing at the time, then that was it. There was no money for you. So I wrote to Richard Branson, and I thought maybe he could help us, because he seemed to be supporting a number of people, and I said we need a sponsor. So I got in touch with Richard Branson, and I said, any chance you could do that? And I got a standard letter from some secretary further down in the chain, and I thought, I bet he hasn't even seen it. So I wrote again, and I got the same standard letter back. So I wrote, I don't know how many letters, probably about 20 letters to Richard Branson. And I said, I'm going to carry on writing, because I want to know that Richard Branson has actually seen our proposition. We only wanted about £10,000, which would not really pay wages, but it was to get a vehicle, to get the whole production up and running, so that we could do a proper serious tour. And I kept writing every week. I would send out a letter, or twice a week or something like that, quite regularly. And I did send out quite a few letters. And eventually Richard Branson did get back in touch on a handwritten note saying, sorry, not for us. And then I accepted it. But at that point I was quite disillusioned with the whole thing. And it had been a lot of hard work. And I think the others had lost interest as well, because there were nothing was happening. And you need a lot of tenacity to do this. And at the same time, as I say, I had met my future wife. We were getting together, and I could no longer afford to keep the office going in Littlehampton and stay on my mother's floor. I think my mother must have been the catalyst, because I think she left that job to do something else, and I had to find somewhere to live. And in the story that you'll get when I talk about meeting my future wife, we moved to Worthing and rented a flat. And because of that, I could no longer carry on at Dance Industry, have the office and all the rest of it. So unfortunately, the theatre tour of the Mime show, that took a long time and a lot of effort to put together, that did perform and was enjoyed by everybody who saw it, never really went any further. And sometimes that happens. And that's been a number of projects that I've tried to get off the ground, have got to a certain level, and success has never quite manifested itself. But, it is what it is. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll continue with my story if you want me to. Don't forget to follow, like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. Give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. And if you do like my stuff, please think about supporting me. A little bit of patronage really goes a long way. Till next time, bye-bye.